Racist cops arrest elderly black man until he makes one phone call to the Supreme Court. This isn't just a story about prejudice. It's about how quickly power dynamics can shift and how the quietest voices often carry the most weight. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson as James Whitaker made his way home. At 78 years old, he moved with deliberate care, balancing grocery bags filled with essentials, fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a carton of milk. His steps were slow but steady, each one carrying the weight of decades lived under the shadow of injustice, and a hope that progress had finally taken root. James wasn't thinking about history or politics that evening. He was focused on simpler things: the warmth of his favorite armchair, the comforting aroma of dinner simmering on the stove, and the quiet satisfaction of another day well lived. But life has a way of interrupting even the most ordinary moments. As he turned onto Maple Street, two squad cars roared to a halt beside him, their tires screeching against the asphalt. Four officers emerged, their movements brusque and aggressive. Before James could process what was happening, one of them barked, "Hand where we can see them." Startled but composed, James froze for a moment before slowly raising his hands. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice calm despite the knot tightening in his stomach. "We got a report of a suspicious person matching your description," another officer replied curtly. "Now step back against the wall." James complied, his mind racing. Suspicious? For walking home with groceries? He glanced down at his neatly pressed slacks and button-up shirt, wondering how anyone could mistake him for anything other than what he was, an elderly man simply trying to live his life. The officers frisked him roughly, ignoring his protests. When they found nothing incriminating, not so much as a pocket knife, they grew visibly frustrated. One muttered something under his breath about wasting time, while another snapped handcuffs around James's wrists. "You're coming with us," the lead officer declared, yanking James toward the patrol car. It was then that James remembered something, a lifeline buried deep within his past. Something these men clearly didn't know about him. As they shoved him into the back seat, he said quietly but firmly, "I need to make a phone call." The officers laughed derisively. "Yeah, right," one sneered. "You'll get your phone call at the station." "No," James interrupted, his tone sharper now. "I need to make it now, and if you don't let me, you'll regret it." For a split second, there was silence. Then the lead officer smirked. "Fine, old man. Make your call. See if anyone cares enough to bail you out." They handed him a cell phone, likely expecting him to dial some distant relative or friend who wouldn't answer anyway. Instead, James dialed a number from memory, his fingers steady despite the gravity of the situation. After a few rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hello," came the crisp, authoritative tone on the other end. "It's James Whitaker," he said simply. "I'm in trouble." There was a pause, followed by a sharp intake of breath. "Where are you?" James gave the address, then hung up without further explanation. The officers watched him with smug expressions, clearly amused by what they assumed was a futile attempt to summon help. They had no idea who James really was, or who he knew. 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air again, but this time it wasn't more patrol cars arriving. A black sedan pulled up behind the squad cars, its presence commanding immediate attention. Out stepped a tall, impeccably dressed woman flanked by two aides. Her stern gaze swept over the scene, landing finally up on the officers. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The lead officer stammered, caught off guard. "Ma'am, we're handling a situation here. This individual happens to be Justice James Whitaker." The woman interrupted, her tone icy. "Retired Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court." The officers blanched, their bravado evaporating instantly. One of them fumbled for words. "We received a report." "A report of what, exactly?" The woman shot back. "An elderly man carrying groceries? That's your probable cause." By now, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Phones were out, recording every moment. The officers looked panicked, realizing too late that they'd crossed a line they couldn't uncross. Justice Whitaker stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "I understand mistakes happen," he said evenly. "But this wasn't a mistake. This was prejudice, and I won't stand for it." The woman, who introduced herself as a representative from the Department of Justice, nodded grimly. "These officers will be investigated thoroughly," she assured him. "And rest assured, this incident will not go unpunished." As the officers stood there, humiliated and speechless, James turned to address the growing crowd. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice strong and clear. "It's about all of us, about how far we've come and how far we still have to go. We deserve better than this. Our children deserve better than this." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the neighborhood. For once, justice had been swift and undeniable. Later that night, James sat alone in his living room, staring at the framed photo on his mantel. It showed him standing alongside colleagues in judicial robes, a testament to a lifetime of service to the law. He sighed deeply, the weight of the day settling heavily on his shoulders. His phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was the woman from earlier, the DOJ representative. "Justice Whitaker," she began, her tone softer now. "Thank you for allowing us to handle this. But I have to ask, why didn't you fight back sooner? You could have ended this years ago." James chuckled dryly. "Because fighting isn't always about making noise," he replied. "Sometimes it's about knowing when to speak and letting the truth do the rest." She fell silent, absorbing his words. Finally, she said, "Well, you've certainly made an impact tonight. People will remember this." "They'd better," James murmured, "because if they don't, we'll keep having nights like this. And that's something none of us can afford." The next morning, news of the incident spread like wildfire. Local reporters camped outside James's modest home, eager for a statement. National outlets picked up the story, turning it into a symbol of systemic racism and unchecked authority. Social media buzzed with outrage, hashtags trending across platforms. Protesters gathered outside the police department, demanding accountability and reform. Meanwhile, the officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Their names became synonymous with arrogance and bias, their actions dissected in op-eds and talk shows. Some defended them, citing the challenges faced by law enforcement. Others condemned them outright, pointing to the blatant disregard for due process and human decency. Amidst the chaos, James remained unshaken. He declined interviews, choosing instead to issue a brief written statement. "To my fellow citizens, what happened to me is not unique. It is part of a pattern that has persisted for far too long. My experience should serve as a wake-up call, not just for those in positions of power, but for all of us. Change begins with awareness, but it must continue with action. Let us work together to build a society where no one is judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." His words resonated deeply, striking a chord with people from all walks of life. Letters poured in from strangers expressing gratitude and solidarity. Community leaders reached out, seeking guidance on how to address systemic issues within their own neighborhoods. Even politicians cited his statement in speeches, pledging to push for meaningful legislation. But James knew better than to let praise cloud his judgment. He understood that real change required more than words. It demanded sustained effort and unwavering commitment. So, he did what he had always done. He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Over the following weeks, James became a quiet force for transformation. He met with activists, academics, and policymakers, sharing insights gleaned from his years on the bench. He advised grassroots organizations working to dismantle racial inequities in policing and criminal justice. He attended town halls and community forums, lending his voice to discussions often dominated by anger and despair. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of activity, James never lost sight of his roots. He continued his daily routines, finding solace in simplicity. On weekends, he volunteered at a local soup kitchen, serving meals to those less fortunate. He mentored young students, encouraging them to pursue education and careers in fields traditionally closed to minorities. And every evening, He returned to his armchair, reflecting on the day's events with a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as he walked through the park near his home, a young boy approached him shyly. Clutching a tattered notebook, the child asked hesitantly, "Are you the judge from the news?" James smiled warmly. "Yes, I am. And who might you be?" "I'm Marcus," the boy replied, his eyes wide with admiration. "I want to be a lawyer someday, like you." "Well, Marcus," James said, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze, "if you truly believe in justice, then you're already halfway there. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop fighting for what's right." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he nodded vigorously. "Thank you, sir." As James watched the boy run off, he felt a renewed sense of hope. Perhaps the world wasn't beyond repair after all. Perhaps, with patience and perseverance, it could still become the place he'd dreamed of, a place where everyone was treated with dignity and respect.